Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. We're recording this episode on a Friday afternoon and I'm joined as usual by Samuel Luckhurst. Now, we'll keep this pod a little bit more brief than usual. We've got time constraints today. But Samuel was at Wimbledon on Wednesday and I was going to ask him about it, but I probably shouldn't, Samuel, because it was a disaster, was it not?
Well, yeah, I just covered that, didn't I? Unfortunately, if you had a ticket for centre on Wednesday and the men's match, obviously the men's match was cancelled because Alex de Minaur withdrew, and then it was two doubles matches after a ladies' quarter final. So it's not a surprise that when I was leaving, it was already pretty deserted at Wimbledon. Everyone wants to. A lot of people would love to go, and I still recommend it, but it is quite an antiquated and backwards establishment. They don't seem to they don't seem to be keen on learning lessons. I think the crowds are the lowest since 1998. So there are a lot of reasons why, and it's not just down to the weather all the time.
Well, look, I hope you enjoyed a few glasses of Pimm's anyways, regardless of the
I
action
did.
or lack of
Drowning
action.
my sorrows.
Yes. Yeah, on the tennis courts. Joshua Zirkzee, Samuel, we'll start with him today. We'll get into some transfer bits in the next half an hour or so. United could announce an agreement to sign Zirkzee basically imminently now. They've made progress this week, as we expected. We discussed that on the last podcast, but it now seems to be inching closer. I hate using that phrase.
We're ticking off all the phrases, making progress, inching closer, set to arrives, set for medical, and I think announces is probably the last one we're waiting for. It's been in the post for a long time. It seemed like a very easy deal to do by and large. I think Ty wrote last night that the cost of it is spread over 3 years, and it's a little bit more than his release clause, which was 40 million euros, I think, and United are paying something like 42 million euros because the cost can be spread over 3 years. That is that buzzword amortization again, and it allows clubs to be more creative with deals, and it's better it's better in terms of balancing the books as well, and which is something that United have to consider with again profitability and sustainability rules, FFP rules as well. So there's a lot of minutiae surrounding transfers these days, even when it just comes to a player who was third in line to start for the Dutch at the Euros. Wout Weghorst was coming on ahead of him, but even still, he's represented by Kia Joorabchian, and you always sense that there's going to be a little bit more that United would have to spend just to get that deal done. Obviously, that fee won't factor in the agent's commission. So I'd say it's probably a little bit more than that. But ultimately, you've got to go off the fee that the club will probably circulate once that deal is finally done. And I think we're all just kind of like, certainly you and I are probably just sick and tired of the every cough, spit and breath of these transfer tales, and it would just be a case of looking forward to actually watching him play for United when he gets the opportunity.
Yeah, in terms of what we actually know about him, you've just said it yourself. He hasn't really been playing at the Euros. He was a late call-up, wasn't he? But there has been a suggestion. I was watching Sky Sports the other day, and it was a former Dutch player. His name I can't remember, but he was saying there was
Mario Melchior. He was on the radio the other night. I forgot to message you about him. I mean, I don't think we've actually addressed this, but it was Chelsea, that infamous Chelsea away game last season, and in the press box, I was sat between you and Rich, and sat next to you was the former Chelsea and Netherlands right back Mario Melchior, who, of course, as you do with anyone you're ever sat next to, you strike up conversation. And I kind of sensed that there was not the usual Steven Railston rapport going on here. So I actually said to Rich, I said, I bet he's not got a effing clue who this guy is next to him. And Rich kind of like laughed. And then I said to you, do you know who that is? And you didn't know who it was.
So, I just whispered no. And to be fair, I think you made a joke about that at half time. And when you told me, I said to him, so look, I know you used to play a bit. And he went, so you do know. But no, he was a good bloke, although his analysis of the game, and he wouldn't leave us alone. He was looking at everything I was tweeting. He was reading my article.
I know. I think you might have, if you were filing the like close to the whistle piece, you might have been struggling given the amount of times Mario Melchiot was in your ear. But it's not bad contact to have if United sign a Dutch right back at some point down the line.
Well, look, I thought I'd got away with that. I hadn't been brought up on the podcast, but you've just embarrassed to say you've had it. Um, Anyways, this I can't remember who it was, but he was saying that there was a clamour in the Netherlands for Zirkzee to play, which is understandable when Weghorst is coming on. He scored 12 goals in 37 games for Bologna last season. Obviously, they had a wonderful season qualifying for the Champions League against all odds. He could play a few different positions across the front line as well, which is a huge benefit. But I guess he's coming to the club actually with a similar profile to Rasmus Højlund, but he will be the backup striker, we understand, or at least for the start of the season, and perhaps you could win a starting role from there. We'll have to see how it goes.
Well, we will, and I understand why they've gone for another striker with a similar profile to Højlund, because it's long term thinking, and if you've got two forwards who are in their early 20s and the potential is there, and they've got the experience of playing in one of the big five leagues, and they're both internationals. They've both played at international tournaments now as well. There's infinite sense in going for someone of that profile again. I think I've said before, I've always felt that United should have looked for someone a little bit more experienced, more proven, who'd been around the block. And also it's another striker that they're getting in who you can't say, factually, you cannot say he's a reliable, a proven, a consistent goal scorer, which was also one of the drawbacks with Højlund last season. And that did, however way you look at it, it did partly cost United in terms of their final league position. They didn't win enough games. They finished with a minus goal difference, and they finished 8th in the table. Of course, the defensive issues were a much greater issue than Højlund's goal scoring, but his dry runs were an issue, and also since March he's been a better substitute than a starter. Just in general, he didn't have a good Euros, and I think there's mitigation behind that because Denmark only scored 2 goals in their 4 games. Maybe the system didn't suit them. They didn't appear a particularly threatening side either, even in that England game, which they controlled for the majority. They weren't exactly probing England or looking on the cusp of inflicting defeat on England either. But watching Højlund, it was quite recognisable the way he played, and that callousness. And when there were times last season at United where he would have big opportunities and he wouldn't take them. City at home, when he went through one-on-one, and his naivety really did show in that instance. Anfield, that one-on-one he had, and he hit the ball straight at Ederson. There's another one that springs to mind as well that I was thinking of. But at the Euros, of course, he had that one-on-one with Manuel Neuer, and of course you're coming up against the best teams, and in Neuer's case, probably the best goalkeeper this century. And that is part of the learning curve, and he's still only 21 or 22, so he's got time on his side, and he is going to get better. I've no doubt about that. But United cannot continue just looking at the state of play and thinking, we're buying for the future, or we'll do this in 1 or 2 years' time, because that's just not worked out with them in the last 11 years, and they do need. They need greater success more urgently this season, and that means climbing up the league ladder, and it means effectively it does mean winning another trophy, because that is, in fairness to Erik ten Hag, that is a standard that he's set. He's won a trophy in each of his 2 seasons, so the expectation is still going to be that, despite the league finish last season and the Champions League campaign, that there is going to be a form of expectation that United will win a trophy again this season, and that's the way it should be at United. And you do need a good blend, the right blend of youth and experience, and it'll be interesting to see what they do in other areas of the pitch. Of course, you look at the centre backs they're looking at. Matthijs de Ligt, okay, he's 24. But he's been around the block. I think that's, I don't necessarily agree with them going for De Ligt, but the pedigree is there. But then you look at Jared Branthwaite and Leny Yoro. Should that happen, they are two callow centre backs, and you are going to need some seniority back there. And I'm not suggesting that they should have triggered Rafael Varane's contract extension. I think he just came to the end of his end of the road at United quite naturally. But you are going to need seniority in places, and so far it has felt a little bit like the transfer window 5 years ago, when it was, let's get young players in, and let's get young British players in if at all possible, which was a very peculiar strategy, and one that they abandoned quite quickly. But you need to have players in that squad that are going to help out the younger players, because last season that was a big problem. The younger players were the ones who were carrying the team. It wasn't the senior players by and large. You could say that Bruno Fernandes was the most consistent senior player that lifted United more often than not, but it was mainly Alejandro Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo that were doing the heavy lifting, and that's wholly unfair on two players who hopefully will be at United for many, many more years to come. But they are going to need some seniority around them, and the greatest United sides in my lifetime, the seniority has been very visible in those teams. I don't imagine the average age of those teams would have been under 26, probably. I don't know off the top of my head, but you've got to get that blend right, and just going for potential all the time. There is an element of risk attached to that, and especially if you're United, because of the sheer scrutiny and the expectation.
We're the founders of the Nicholas Fulcrook fan club, aren't we? We'll take that job responsibility. I think you did a piece on him when I was away.
Rodrigo Muniz as well.
He
was another good shout, wasn't he? Although I don't think any of us thought that was realistic.
No, but I mean, they would have been experienced additions. More Fulcrook, he's obviously older than Muniz, but it's a very good point you make about the attacking options. If you actually look at just the strikers on the books now, when Zirkzee signs, he'd be 23, Rasmus Højlund's 21, and I'll throw in Ethan Wheatley in there as well, who made his debut last season against Sheffield United. He's 18 years old, so really young, and it'll be interesting to see how they fare going forward. And I think the appointment of Ruud van Nistelrooy, Samuel, moving on to that, will help those players a lot. I wrote about that last week, and I kind of had to think about which players specifically will benefit. And I know we discussed it on the last podcast, but their appointments have been made official now. Their visas have been confirmed. But when you think about Wheatley and Zirkzee, who's only 23, he's going to be the most senior of the striker options, which is quite incredible. They should really benefit from working from Van Nistelrooy. And I know we've said the point already, but I just thought I'd reiterate it, really.
Well, yeah. I don't think he's not coming as a striker coach. It would have been strange if he had done. There was the lines got a little bit blurred with Benny McCarthy, because there were times when he was striker coach. There were times when he was just a first team coach. Yet he was a coach who didn't travel to every away game, and he wasn't always sat in the dugout at Old Trafford. It seemed like that was just a bit too. That arrangement in general, I don't think it didn't seem like he brought a great deal to the table. And of course, if you're a coach who's not travelling to every game, then your existence is going to be questioned. And I'd never want to discourage former or current footballers from speaking quite openly about topics, but I think what he said about Jadon Sancho, which was quite defensive of him, was completely overlooking and ignoring his post where he accused Ten Hag of lying. It sounded like someone who didn't necessarily keep his ear to the ground very much as well at United. So there were certain coaches the coaching staff needed an overhaul. Richard Hartis, they've not actually confirmed that he's gone and a new goalkeeping coach has come in. But Richard Hartis, his time at the club, I think we probably covered it the other day, the standard of goalkeeping was poor, and he can't account for everything. He can't account for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's mismanagement. He can't account for Ten Hag requiring a year to assess David De Gea and then signing Andre Onana when he was available on a free the previous year, and Onana's first season being worse than De Gea's last season. But clearly something was amiss on the training ground, and it's natural to try and freshen it up, which is what they want to do. Dan Ashworth is of course the voice who's been attached to these statements now, along with Ten Hag, because he's the sporting director. He's only been in the building not less than 2 weeks, and he's talking about welcoming back Rude as if he was anywhere near around Old Trafford when Van Nistelrooy was a player at the club. But essentially, we've got to wait until well into the season to see if this is having an impact. It's interesting that Ineos haven't intended on sacking Ten Hag until the FA Cup final, and then waiting 17 days, and then leaking news that he was going to be staying at gone 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and then only triggering the 1-year option in his contract extension. They're now bringing in three Dutch coaches and one Dutch striker, which is essentially just operating like they have been in the last two transfer windows, summer transfer windows when John Mertz was the football director. But it's on a bigger scale this time. It's, as I said, it's four Dutch guys who are being hired, brought into the coaching staff, brought into the playing squad, and it did make me chuckle a little bit to see that René Hake is, of course, represented by SEG, the agency that is run by Kees Vos, who is Ten Hag's agent as well. So it's very, very easy to be sceptical of some of these hires that United have overseen, particularly under a new structure as well, and particularly given the manner in which they decided to keep the manager. And vindication will only be obtained if they improve immeasurably next season and they have a good start to the season. And as I've said before, it's not exactly an invidious start to the campaign. It's they're always going to be. I think with competitiveness, it's become a lot tougher in the Premier League, but United haven't exactly got a start that's going to fill them with dread. And remember when it was David Moyes' first season, he actually complained about the fixture list they had, because they played Chelsea, Liverpool and City, I think, in their first 5 games. And immediately, if you strike a tone like that, and it was obviously a defeatist tone as well, you're on a hide into nothing. And he was someone who just shouldn't have been at United in the first place.
Training's going to change going forward. It'll be interesting to see how that develops, obviously, with the appointments of those 2 new coaches. And although we've got more Dutch influence coming into the club, Mitchell van der Gaag has left. He was Erik ten Hag's assistant for 2 years, really important to Ten Hag. And I was told he was quite involved with the academy as well, with Travis Binion. He was kind of that conduit, along with Darren Fletcher, between the academy and the first team. Van der Gaag had a good relationship with academy coaches. He's going to pursue first team opportunities, well, a career into management, I should say. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But that is bound to have an effect on training, Samuel, because if you've got 2 coaches, I'm including Eric Ramsey in this, along with Van der Gaag, who were responsible for taking the training sessions. I was told they echo Ten Hag's message, or did do that. There's going to be new voices now at Carrington.
And Steve McLaren, unfortunately, is on crutches at the moment, so his enthusiasm during training sessions, that will be tempered. I was told on Monday that he was driven in, and fortunately he'll be back on the grass in a matter of weeks, I think, maybe a little bit sooner than that. So hopefully he's not out too long. It's first injury of the season for United, but not exactly on the scale of severity that they had with some players getting injured last season. Darren Fletcher is, how long this will stay the case, I don't know, but where he's a first team coach now, I mean, people forget he rejoined United as a first team coach in January of 2021, and 2 months later he was appointed the technical director, and there was a lot of there was a lot of confusion over his technical director role, because he'd watched some games in the stands, some games in the dugout, some games in the director's box, some games with analysts. And I think his role was, I think Ten Hag coming in brought a bit more clarity to that role, but it was still an unconventional technical director remit in that he was on the grass, he was watching training with the other coaches. How long that lasts remains to be seen. But it is also convenient that, I mean, United were never going to say Eric's ally of the last 5 years was taken away from him, and he's now got a couple of new coaches to work with. Whether it's genuine or not that Mitchell van der Gaag wanted to leave to go and manage elsewhere, we may never know, unless he does come up with, unless he does get a manager's job sometime soon. But I think that's probably the potentially the most significant loss for Ten Hag, in that his assistant, his ally of the last 5 years, the man who actually accompanied him to that Crystal Palace game in May 2022, the day before Ten Hag was unveiled as the new United manager. That man's not going to be in the dugout with him next season. And of course, he's got a couple of compatriots with him. One who is a fellow stablemate at the same agency. The three of them, Ten Hag, Hake, and Van Nistelrooy, they're out having dinner in Hale the other evening as well. So you expect a closeness between them because they're all in the same working environment. They practically share the same space. At Carrington, the coach's office is adjoined to the manager's office, and they're they're the same nationality as well. So I don't think anyone has suggested there's a dichotomy there, or divisions or anything like that. But it is still quite, it feels quite telling that a manager who the power brokers were clearly not certain about, there have been some very drastic changes to his backroom staff, with two very, very senior first team coaches in, so senior that they were managers at their previous clubs, and he's had quite a time served ally, certainly in this day and age, leaving after 5 years by his side at Ajax and United.
It is very unusual to see two managers go into coaching jobs for the next roles, isn't it? I mean, I can't really think of an example of that in the last few years at all, really. We'll leave it there for part one, anyways, and we'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back. Now a name that is exciting supporter Samuel. Leny Yoro from Lille, defender. Only 18 years old, but he's already established himself as one of the most exciting prospects in Europe. Had a very good season last year. Played a lot of games. I think it was 43 appearances, which is impressive for a player of his age. United have obviously had a bid accepted, but they do face competition from Real Madrid, which you never want to hear that, do you? If you're in talks for a player, that Real Madrid are also interested in that player. But I think there's one thing that United can offer over Real Madrid, Samuel, and that's game time and the promise of a more prominent role. When you look at the talent that Real Madrid have, the best squad in Europe, obviously Champions League winners, but if he wants more game time, then perhaps United are the club for him, and no doubt they'll still make a strong case for him to sign, regardless of Madrid's interest.
I'm not sure about that, in that Nacho
Come on, Samuel, glass half full.
I know Nacho has just left Real Madrid, but they've got Antonio Rudiger, Eder Militao,
Alaba,
who was Alaba's out until 2025.
Oh God,
Eder Militao was out for the majority of last season. There was a young teenage centre-back who moved from Liga to Real Madrid in 2011 when United wanted him, called Rafael Varane. And I don't think he regrets for 1 second moving to Real Madrid over Manchester United back then, when there would certainly have been a more compelling case to go to United over Madrid in 2011 than there is now. Real Madrid are the La Liga winners, they're the Champions League winners, they have Champions League football to offer. United's far from guaranteed of qualifying for the Champions League next season. It's another campaign in the Europa League. I know Lille is closer to England than Spain, but I think if you're in Leny Yoro's position, I think United would do extremely well to convince him to join them, and maybe it'll be because Real Madrid just don't bother bidding for him, and he's got no choice because Lille need to cash in this summer with his contract up next year. Speaking to some people, that they say what a top talent he is. He's just missed out on the Olympic squad. I think he was in the provisional squad for France's Olympics team, but he's not going to be involved in that. So he would he'd be available pretty much as soon as possible if he was to come in. But it's a hell of it'd be a hell of a culture shock for an 18-year-old coming into the Premier League and coming into a Manchester United defence that was leakier than the Old Trafford roof last season, and making an impact. He would have to be some player to overcome all of that pressure, and maybe he's got it in him. I also think the other advantage Madrid have over United is that, and this is not a bad reflection on United whatsoever. It's just it's down to the cultures. But La Liga is a more sedate league, and I think if you're a centre back, it's kind of like just settling into a nice swimming pool that has a nice temperature. Whereas if you're going into United, it's almost like you're jumping straight into a tsunami. It's or a vortex. It can be that it can be that unforgiving. And Lisandro Martinez is proof that you can have a really terrible chastening start at United, but come good very very quickly. And that's a piece of evidence United could submit if they try to convince Yoro to make that move, and that Martinez has probably, taking everything into consideration, he's probably been Ten Hag's most successful signing, despite missing the best part of a year due to 3 or 4 injury issues. But looking at United next season, I mean, Martinez has to be a starter. Nobody would be looking at, in terms of if you're considering how United might look next season, everyone would have Martinez in that team, regardless of how many defenders they sign. He's going to be critical to how they perform next season. His absence had dire consequences for them last season, and even at the start of the season when he was playing, their form obviously was not good, and that was probably partly down to him not being 100% fit, and that's on United because they got the surgery wrong. There was clearly a problem there, and you had to have a second round of surgery. So it's not bad going for an 18-year-old French lad if you've got Real Madrid and Man United both in for you. But when you consider, just look at that Real Madrid squad, look at the team they're building. They're the Champions League winners, and they've won it some like 6 times in the past decade. But the changing of the guard at that club is extraordinary. To go from Modric, Cruz, and Casemiro to Camavinga, Tchouaméni, and Bellingham, to lose Benzema and to still have the success they've had. They've got Rodrigo and Vinicius. They've got Mbappe. They've got the kid Endrick coming in from Brazil. The defence, that's kind of the area that logically they'd concentrate on now in terms of that changing of the guard. Of course, Rudiger is still a formidable defender, and at 31 he can still go on for a fair few years at Real Madrid. But Varane, in his first 3 or 4 years at Real Madrid, he was being rotated with Pepe, Sergio Ramos. So they've not got. It's not like if Leny Yoro was to go in there, it's not like he's got 4 or 5 ahead of him in the pecking order. I think United have probably got more centre backs, recognisable centre backs, than Real Madrid have currently. So, maybe that deal. It's if it comes down to Real Madrid not bidding, the next question you'd ask is, well, why United signing someone who would rather be at Real Madrid? Which realistically you could say of most players, but there's been a lot of noise around Madrid regarding Yoro, and if it comes off and if he's brilliant for United, then they can toast to a job well done.
We will see. Real Madrid tend to get what they want done in the transfer market. It's just the way it's been over the last 15 years. Moving on to Toby Collyer. Samuel, he signed a new contract. I believe last night you just did a little story on it today, which is quite a nice story. I think I last watched them in February against Manchester City's under-21s. At Leeds Sports Village. He captained the side that day. He did really well to win the ball back to set up a winning goal. I think it was Ethan Wheatley as well. I've always been pretty impressed with Collyer. He's a decent operator in midfield. Defensive, he plays a bit deeper. He joined from Brighton, of course, a few years back. We noticed after the FA Cup final, which I think is quite interesting, that Ten Hag went up to him and put his arm around him again. And if anyone remembers, of course, after the Carabao Cup final, Eric Ten Hag did that with Kobbie Mainoo, and I think we both commented, well, we're not expecting Collyer to go on and do what Mainoo's done, but Ten Hag requested to be at his signing ceremony, didn't he, Samuel? So maybe there is some significance there.
I know it. He doesn't. I mean, you don't want to be hard at all on the lad, but he's not had. He's already 20, and he's not had that traction comparable to Mainoo or Garnacho at academy level, but he's one of those players that Ten Hag has taken a shine to. And as you said, he made a beeline for him after they won the FA Cup. He was in the dressing room. They insisted he got in with. I think they took a picture of the academy players, which Anthony, of all people, tried to gate crash, didn't he? I think he did gate
Someone
crash
cropped
it,
him
but
out
then
as
they
well.
took another one that they cropped him out. Yeah,
One of the players cropped him out.
I think a few United fans would like to crop him out of most celebratory pictures, but they insisted on that as well. And of course, Toby Collier's not made his debut yet, but I think he was on the bench 8 times last season, which would have been valuable work experience. And I think there's a very good chance that he'll make his first senior appearance for them next week against Rosenborg or Rangers in those first 2 pre-season friendlies. He did play for the academy. He started, I think, for the academy when they lost to Wrexham in San Diego last year. So he's had a decent amount of experience over the past year, and it's still a tall order for him to force his way into that first team squad, and maybe he'll go out on loan. I mean, his contract length is relatively long now to 2027 with the option of an additional year. But the fact that Ten Hag has there've only been 3 youngsters contract signings that he's decided to attend, and the first 2 were Kobbie Mainoo in February 2023 and Alejandro Garnacho in April 2023. And of course, Garnacho by that time was very firmly established in the first team squad. I think Kobbie Mainoo had made a couple of appearances for the first team and was on a very good upward. His trajectory was on the right track at that point. So Collier's the first one who's actually not played for the club that Ten Hag has insisted on being present for his ceremony signing. So hopefully this isn't just false hope, but sometimes, and I've not watched anywhere near enough of Toby Collyer to make an authoritative judgment on him. You'll have watched him far more than I have, but sometimes there are certain players, certain academy players, that a manager sees something in that nobody else sees anything in. I mean, Scott McTominay and Mourinho springs to mind. Maybe to a lesser extent, Anthony Elanga when he played under Ralph Rangnick. I think there was a lot to like about Elanga. I think Rangnick liked a lot more about him than others did, and fair dues to Elanga. He played quite a lot during that period. Paddy McNair and Tyler Blackett under Louis van Gaal, players who I think it was just quite a surprise, quite staggering that they never played for Manchester United, yet they had two seasons in the first team setup. Oh, sorry, Blackett went on loan to Celtic that second season, but McNair had 2 seasons within that group before he was sold. So sometimes you're in the right place at the right time, or you're the right-footed player. In Blackett's case, he was left-footed, and United didn't have a single left-footed centre-back at that time. And because Van Gaal was insistent on right-footed centre-backs and left-footed centre-backs, that's why someone who was so hopeless at Birmingham City the previous season on loan that he got cheered by some of their fans was all of a sudden parachuted into the United lineup for Van Gaal's first game in charge.
Maybe Ten Hag just wants Collyer to sign for SEG. He wants him to switch agency, and that's why he's attending the signing ceremony. That's a joke. Look,
you say it's a joke. I think there have been some other approaches along those lines.
That's why I said it.
I think there's certainly one player whose camp politely asked SEG not to bother anymore.
And I'd have that player above Collyer, from what I've seen, anyways. Sunday afternoon, or Sunday evening, I should say, Euro 2024 final, England versus Spain. Luke Shaw and Kobbie Mainoo are likely to represent United in that game. Look, we've said it, chapter and verse on Kobbie Mainoo on this podcast. A fantastic young talent, just a generational player, really. We've been so impressed with him. In October, I was watching him play for the under-21s down at Salford and against Copenhagen. Fast forward 8 months later, and he's going to play in the Euros final. Just quickly, Samuel, because we are coming to an end, but what an incredible journey, and it'll be fantastic to see him start for England on Sunday night.
I don't know if there are any more superlatives to use regarding him. I mean, he's just a player I've never ever had a bad word to say about. And after interviewing him, I don't think I'll ever in May. I don't think I'll ever have a bad word to say about him. His progress in the last. I don't know how you want to condense the time frame really, because he's had he's had quite a few breakthroughs, and a couple of them came before he even made his debut. But unfortunately, they preceded breakdowns. He had an injury, a quad injury in April 23, and then of course that very, very unfortunate injury against Real Madrid in pre-season last year, which meant that he didn't play for the first team again in 4 months. But since that full debut against Everton, which was not even 8 months
4th of
ago, I don't
November.
think.
Yeah.
I think it was later than that. I think it was
Around that time.
26th of November.
Oh, okay, so a bit early.
So within that time frame to do what he's done, to become indispensable for Manchester United and England during a tournament, not during some qualifiers in March, to score a winner in an FA Cup final. It is, I think, just in the history of United, it's one of their great academy success stories. I think you can even say that now, and I know it's at a very premature time, and there will still be people at the club preaching caution because he's only 19, and hopefully he'll be playing for United till when he's approaching 39, possibly, depending on how durable he is. We've seen it before with,
Will you be 60
Ryan
when
Giggs.
Kobbie Mainoo's 39?
Well, or I might be dead. I don't know.
Don't say that.
I don't know. I don't know. Covering United, I think there's a distinct possibility of that.
Someone might put a hit on you. Yeah.
Yeah. But watching Kobbie Mainoo makes me feel young. Put it that way. There was that clip that circulated early in the week of Bielsa doing a very articulate and erudite breakdown of how football is becoming. It's not as entertaining because of the commercialisation of it, which I think really did strike a chord with a hell of a lot of supporters. And then you see Lamine Yamal play with the grace that suggests Lionel Messi bathed him in holy water when he was a baby, and then you watch Kobbie Mainoo play like a Dutchman against actual Dutch midfielders, and it really does restore your faith in the game when you're seeing players like that come through. So whenever Mainoo's done well at this tournament, and it's been a number of times, it's always like, right, I've got to do another positive piece on Kobbie Mainoo, and I'm honestly running out of angles. I was offered a chance to speak to someone from United today about him, and instantly I thought, well, I spoke to him about him chapter and verse about Kobbie Mainoo back in February. So you did that duty, and I'm sure you got an original angle on it. No pressure there, but we've I think you and I in particular, given how much we've watched of him from the academy to this level, I think you do extract a great deal of pleasure seeing someone before most other people have, and charting their rise and seeing them, really take their chance. And the cream has well and truly risen to the top with him.
It's one of the best parts of the job, I think, following a young player's journey up close and just seeing them develop. It's so fulfilling. I told my flatmate 2 years ago, who's a huge United fan, one of my best mates, about Kobbie Mainoo. And I was just saying, look, you need to watch this lad. And I kept banging on about him each month. And finally, he made his debut in Charlton in January last year. And he was right, this is the lad.
Yes.
And he just adores him now. He just adores him, as all United fans do, because he's one of their own. And he's doing fantastically for England as well. So it's brilliant to see.
I was particularly delighted about that, because from the winter training camp in Cadiz, where the main stories were what we got from speaking to Erik ten Hag during that sit down, which was tremendous access. But of course, in our position, you've got to do a little bit more on those trips compared to the other reporters at Nationals or other outlets. And from those two friendlies, the only thing to write home about was Kobbie Mainoo, because they were two insignificant friendlies with very, very callow squads. But he scored in the Cadiz game, and then he did quite well against Real Betis. And I'd watched him in the Youth Cup as well, and I thought, this kid looks like he's going to be. He's on the cusp of a breakthrough at United. And I think I used that. That was kind of like the hook of the headline. He was set for his next breakthrough or approaching his next breakthrough, and then not even maybe a month later, he made his debut against Charlton. So, as I said, when we invest as much as we do in terms of writing about these young lads who we just like watching and we really hope will do well, we almost feel like they're surrogate father when they're scoring in an FA Cup final or conducting the play for England in a European Championship semi-final.
So you can only imagine what the coaches feel and his family when it puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Yeah, it's just tremendous stuff, really. We'll leave it there, Samuel. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Stephen.